let's see here. Just like we draw it up. I would talk, I was asked to talk, I will talk, about the Sabres 19th Century Committee activity that recognizes the overlooked legend from the 19th century. Way back in 2009, for this group, that's not so long ago perhaps, the 19th Century Committee was approached to take a poll of the best ball players of the 19th century who were not yet in the Hall of Fame. And so it started. For the last 15 years, the 19th Century Committee has named an overlooked legend. The scope of the polling has changed a little bit and expanded over the years to include players and other contributors who might not necessarily qualify for the Hall of Fame. Think of players who played less than 10 years or those involved in pre-professional baseball. Now, not all of these selections are, in my humble opinion, or not so humble opinion, were very good selections. The Hall of Fame has got any number of players that we all have opinions of that we don't think should be there, but within this group of 15 we're going to talk about, there's a few of those that I'll chat about their less than sterling qualities. All of the selections are worthy of consideration for contributions to baseball and recognition for what they did during the 19th century, but not all of them are necessarily Hall of Fame worthy. Now, you may take great umbrage at my opinions, and that's okay, because I may not think much of your opinion either. It all works. It's all part of the ever-present argument over who's in and who's out at Cooperstown. Now, before we talk about the players, let's go look at the Hall of Fame for a minute, because that's an import on 19th century players get in. Let's see here. Who is this? No, that's not it. There must be somebody.
Hit the arrow key.
Yeah, I'm trying. There we are. Stephen Clark. In 1935, Cooperstown resident Stephen Clark approached National League president Ford Frick and wanted to start a baseball museum in Cooperstown. It is said that Clark's motivation for this was that to celebrate baseball and its connection to the sport with Cooperstown and to add a tourist destination to town. That baseball connection was the historically incorrect notion that Abner Doubleday invented the game there. Interesting, I wandered through a cemetery in Cooperstown and looking for Stephen Clark's grave, and about 2 rows back, there is an Abner Doubleday buried there. He's a cousin, I think, of Abner Doubleday. I'm not sure if maybe Abner Graves down in 1905 got things a little messed up. Nevertheless, Frick liked the idea. He liked it a lot. And he spoke of encouraging throughout the baseball community. And he was also the force behind the idea to expand the museum into a Hall of Fame. He took the idea of the Hall of Fame from the Hall of Fame of Great Americans that's located in Bronx, New York. Initially, there were 2 committees in the 30s to elect members to this brand new Hall of Fame. One committee was to select 19th century players, and the other what they called modern players. There were only 3 rules. All the members had to be players. You had to have 75% of the votes of all the members of the committee to get in, and only 5 players were going to be selected from each group in that first year. Well, the old-timers got together and couldn't agree on anything. So there were no 19th century committee people, 19th century members put in. And the modern committee picked Babe Ruth, Ty Cobb, Honus Wagner, Walter Johnson, and Christy Mathewson. Ruth had been retired for something like 7 months when they voted on this. So the rules were a little different. Now, with the old-timers failing to pick anyone, Commissioner Landis named another committee to try and pop this up. And his first choice for membership on this committee was, surprise, Commissioner Landis. He headed Ford Frick, Will Harridge, Johnny Heidler, Bill Bramham, and George Troutman, and they dubbed themselves the Centennial Committee, and this is who they selected. George Wright, Morgan Bulkley, Van Johnson, John McGraw, Connie Mack, Alexander Cartwright, and Henry Chadwick. Morgan Bulkley was simply a mistake, probably internal politics that drove that one. And scholarship over the past 20 years has shown that almost every word on Alexander Cartwright's plaque is probably wrong. There's also a line of thought that selectors got confused and picked George Wright instead of his brother Harry. Only McGraw and Mack had been players in the 19th century, but they were not chosen because of their playing ability. They were chosen because they had great managerial careers in the first 30 years of the 20th century. Landis apparently was still dissatisfied with the committee's picks and named another committee in 1939. It included himself and then Ford Frick and Will Harridge. And they added Spaulding, Comiskey, Hoss Radburn, Cap Anson, Buck Ewing, and Candy Cummings. Spaulding and Comiskey were probably chosen because they were owners rather than because of their players, although Comiskey was certainly a Hall of Fame worthy for consideration as a player. He was a very good manager and ran and built up the St. Louis Browns, who won 4 consecutive pennants in the 1880s. Cummings was just a mistake. He got in because he said he invented the curveball, and there's 5 or 6 folks that have got probably better credentials for that. But there was no other 19th century individual added to the Hall of Fame until 1945. And it didn't pick up any speed from that point when they named 7 19th century players. One was added in 49, another in 53, and then we go into the 60s, 70s. We get about 10 in those 2 decades. The 80s, we get a nice round number of 0. The 19th century has become an afterthought. And in the 35 years since, they've added 8. Just to give you an idea, we've added maybe 3 or 4 more since then, but the way the thing is set up, it's every 3 years. They can be considered this year. We'll see what kind of politicking goes on from that. Now, the hurdles are some of the reasons for the Sabres 19th Century Committee to start to look at this. They started to see these things just how could we focus some more attention on these folks. And here are the 15 folks who have been named. The next list, and we'll get to see all these people individually. These are the 7 that I think had no odds of getting into the Hall of Fame, although they're worthy to consider because of historical importance. They did things, they were good players, they're just not necessary Hall of Fame. Briefly, very briefly, here's a little bit about these not so great. Bobby Matthews, according to Baseball Reference, won 297 big league games. Unfortunately for Bobby, Baseball Reference counts as 126 wins in the National Association in that count. Unfortunately, neither the Major League nor the Hall of Fame considers those to be part of his Major League career. This reduces his record to 171 and 144, so instead of being between Lefty Grove and Tommy John on the all-time wins list, he's in between Murray Dixon and Dizzy Trout. Not names you hear that often in conversation. But he is tied with Rick Sutcliffe, Eddie Rommel, Ed Morris, and the ever-present Danny Darwin. Ross Barnes had a similar problem. He was undeniably the star of the National Association. He compiled a 391 batting average in 5 years of the National Association, winning several batting titles. In his one top-flight Major League season, he led the NL in runs, hits, doubles, triples, walks, batting average, on-base percentage, slugging, OPS, and total bases. But a combination of rules changes and health problems caused his career to collapse. There is a Barnes Monument in Mount Morris, New York. If you're ever up somewhere in upstate New York, go on by and take a look at it. In similar fashion, Charlie Bennett saw his baseball career end suddenly in 1893 when he lost his legs in an accident at a train station in Kansas. But he was an outstanding defensive catcher and every bit the equal of any of the 19th century receivers. But he was at best a mediocre hitter. He was a 255 batting average. Back in a time when batting average was the number one statistic that you measured a player's quality. Jack Glasscock was the prime premier fielding shortstop of the 19th century. A gloveless shortstop, Glasscock led the league in fielding percentage 6 times, was no lower than the third in the 12th season. Not afraid to go after tough grounders, he led his league in total chances and fielding percentage 3 times. A mark that stood until the 60s when Luis Aparicio tied it. In the 80s, Ozzie Smith obliterated every shortstop fielding record. None of them have anybody's name but his next to them anymore. Glasscock hit for a decent average, but not for the era he was playing in. When he won one batting title for the National League in 1890, when the Players League was there and the National League was not as robust as it had been. But most of his career, he would finish in the top 20, usually around 20 to 25th in the batting order. By the time 1893 came along and they increased the pitching distance to the current space, he was never better than 41st. So at the bat, he was not much. Fleet Walker is a familiar name, as well as the first black player in the league, although recent research has turned up another player in one game in 1879. Walker had one major league season where he was a solid catcher and a very so-so hitter. But in all, one big league season and 6 in the minors doesn't cry out Hall of Fame. Here he is in 1888 with the Syracuse Stars in the International League. And you notice at the bottom left is another black player. There's a pair of them on that team, and that's Robert Higgins. There's probably half a dozen to a dozen that played in the International League and some other leagues through that time. Some of them very, very good players. Some of them, Bud Fowler was in there, Frank Grant, George Stovey, and on. But as the color line got firmer out there went. Dummy White was a very good 14th season outfielder in the majors and is noted as the best depth player to be appear in the major leagues. A superior outfielder with a batter with a 288 career average, he falls into the same category as Glasscock, good but not great. And that leaves us with Bill Dahlen. Dahlen came within 2 votes of making the Hall of Fame in 2013. But since then, he has not built on the level of support, and the last 2 selection periods, he received 3 or fewer votes. His primary strength was the discovery in the early 2000s that he had a career WAR of 75.3, which puts him in the top 50 all-time of batters. And while a long-time productive hitter, the bloom appears to be off the Bill Dahlen rose as far as Hall of Fame voters are right now. So let's start looking at the others. We're going to start with the 2 overlooked legends who have made the Hall of Fame since this project got off the ground. Deacon White was the second overlooked legend in 2010 and entered the Hall of Fame in 2013. This is Deacon White from 1888. Handsome fellow. Well, that's Deacon White from 1888. Nevertheless, he was still playing at this time. He played until 1890. I've looked. There is no picture of Deacon White anywhere where he smiles. It just doesn't seem to exist anywhere. I don't know if you recognize this guy. This is not the younger Deacon White. This is his brother, Will White, who was a very good pitcher in the early 1880s with Cincinnati. He won about 240 games in the major leagues, and you never hear his name popped up again, part of which the team he played for was the American Association. And we'll chat about that in a little bit. Deacon White was the premier catcher of the 1870s. Half the decade, he spent his time with Boston teams, forming a battery with Al Spalding. They were in the National Association years. And he enjoyed a long and productive big league career from 1876 to 1890, hit .392 in 1873, led the league with 77 RBIs. It was a much shorter schedule in those days. Spalding always called him the best catcher he ever threw to. He had a titanic season in the National League in 1877 with Boston. He led the league as he hit .387. He also topped the league in hits, triples, RBIs, total bases, and slugging. He spent a few more seasons of the 1880s catching, but transitioned to third base. You got to remember that catching at this era was hand-to-hand combat with the ball. No gloves, no chest protectors, no masks, and it was well into the 1890s before gloves provided any real protection for the catchers. But White was very skillful using soft hands to minimize the dangers of injury that plagued most catchers. White also had great status within the era. There were 2 groups of players called the Big Four. These are a group of 4 players, top-notch players who led teams to pennants, very competitive. And here's Deacon White with the 1875 Boston team, along with Al Spalding, Ross Barnes, and Cal McVeigh. You must remember that these were the 4 that William Hulbert spirited away from Boston to Chicago, and when he formed the National League. And Chicago won the pennant their first year. 10 years later, Deacon White is in the Big Four in Buffalo, a major league city at the time, with Dan Bruthers, Hardy Richardson, and Dave Rowe. At that time, Detroit wanted to purchase these players, and Buffalo wouldn't sell them or trade them. So Detroit bought the whole franchise. Combined them. They had done the same thing with minor league Indianapolis, so they get Sam Thompson. And they they accomplished what they wanted to. They built a super team. The first year they had all these players together. They moved from 5th to 2nd, and the next year they won the pennant and smashed everybody in the World Series. Now, it only took the Hall of Fame 78 years of their voting to get Deacon White in. Finally earned his plaque. But he was a worthy selection, the most outstanding catcher in the majors until King Kelly came along, or Buck Ewing a few years later. But it does demonstrate the problems 19th century players encountered to gain some recognition. First, nobody ever saw them play. Look at Ozzie Smith's record. If batting is the key to get into the Hall of Fame, induction for having a stellar glove doesn't quite get you over the hump. But everybody saw Ozzie Smith play. Everybody reads reams of stories about him. There are still YouTube videos you can go. You know what Ozzie Smith can do. He does the back flip, you know, every time somebody talks about the Cardinals. So we see lots about Ozzie through them. Nobody's writing a biography of Deacon White. There's not that many current research going on about Deacon White and articles coming out. Second, the voters on the various Veterans Committee have little understanding of how the game of the 1800s is different from the game of the 1920s and the 1960s. And thirdly, there's certainly a bias where people think today's players are so much better than anybody else that's come along before them. The voters can't appreciate that there are superior players in every era of baseball's long history. White also has a monument in his birthplace of Canton, Ohio. But this also covers Will White and Elmer White, a cousin of his, who were well-known ball players in the minors and in the majors through the period. The next fellow was born John Jackson, and Leslie had mentioned him today as she was going through her presentation on blackball in the 19th century. But he played under the name Bud Fowler. As she Leslie noted, there are lots of theories as to where Fowler came from, a friend, an early manager, some minister, who knows what it may be. But he is known as Bud Fowler. Go read his plaque at Hall of Fame. It's going to say Bud Fowler. It'll note that James Jackson was his birthday, but that's the Bud Fowler. In 1872, he joined his first white team in Newcastle, Pennsylvania, and continued to play with white teams until 1895. Now, didn't play for black teams at all. He played semi-pro ball. He didn't play in professional ball every year. But he never played on an all-black team until 1895. We'll see the same thing happening with Fleet Walker until he almost is ready to retire. He never plays on a black team. These are guys who are going to make their living playing baseball. In 1878, he was the first black player in organized baseball when he played for the Lynn Live Oaks of the International League. He then spent several seasons in semi-pro leagues, joined the Northwestern Stillwater, Minnesota franchise, always a star player. And it's always noted in the papers that he probably is playing several levels below his ability. He started as a pitcher and midway through the 1884 season moved to second base. A good fielding second baseman and apparently a good enough hitter to be signed by white leagues for 17 seasons. He never spent a full season with a single team, and he was often released when the racist sentiment in the community would grow over time. He was named to the Hall of Fame in 2022, as the pioneer in the early baseball era after being selected the Overlooked Legend in 2020. Now, if you look at Fowler's stats on Baseball Reference, you'll see a long list of teams and almost no numbers. They just don't exist. They don't exist, not because he was black. They don't exist because the minor leagues didn't keep much of the statistics that are there. And it's a problem for all 19th century players. You can think RBIs aren't there either. ERA is a guess. We try to read the newspaper articles and make judgments. What's an earned run? What's an unearned run? What's an RBI? What happened on an error? And as Fowler bounced around for 17 seasons, no fewer than 15 teams, he never started a season with the same team he ended with. And we're back to the original question, what makes Bud Fowler a Hall of Famer? And it comes down to inferences. There are scores of comments in newspapers where he played along the lines that he was playing on. If he had white skin, he would be playing on a better team. And there are similar comments from black players attesting to his abilities. Even if some of the individuals giving the testimonials were not sympathetic to Fowler being on the field. So in total, we have this picture of a black ball player fighting his way through discrimination of the age to earn a living playing baseball and playing it well. Can you argue that there's not enough evidence to put him in the Hall? Certainly. But that's also one of the reasons it took Negro League players to the 1970s to get considered and added to the Hall because of the lack of statistics that you could lay out, and it was reputation. And you want to go back 150 years, it gets even tougher. But Fowler does have a few special features. Number one, he's the only Hall of Famer with a street in Cooperstown named after him. This is Fowler Ways that leads. It's a street that leads to Doubleday Field in Cooperstown. Also, the 19th Century Committee and the Negro Leagues Committee both have grave marker projects for unmarked graves of star players that are there. That was the first grave was not part of a project like that. It was a Sabre project, and it's Bud Fowler. In 1987, Sabre had placed a marker at Oakview Cemetery. Oakview Cemetery is about 30 miles from Cooperstown. If you're ever there, take a ride on over. Go in the far right-hand entrance. Head on down about halfway down that road. Look to your right. It's right on the road. Next, we come to the players who made their contributions prior to the National League in 1876. Somebody out there? Oh, at least I know. My only rule, man, I don't mind people falling asleep. I just no audible snoring. That's a rule. The selection of Daniel Lucius Doc Adams as Sabres overlooked the 19th Century Legend in 2014 was a step back in time to the New York Knickerbockers, the pioneers of baseball. Doc Adams is our oldest legend, being born in 1814, 27 years before number 2 on the list, Jim Creighton. Adams was a player with the famous New York Knickerbockers. That's him right in the middle. But his contributions to the game were primarily in rulemaking. He established the position of shortstop. He was the person that sort of invented that by saying, oh, we need to put a player out there. And leadership in baseball's first association in the 1858-1859 period. We know he was doing it, but one of the problems we have is we don't know. It was committee that did the work. Did Doc Adams do this? Did he just secretary for this sort of thing? To illustrate the issue, with a quick walk down memory lane, in 1908, the Mills Commission declared Abner Doubleday the inventor of baseball. No applause. We're good. Although almost immediately it was debunked, it remained in public consciousness for very many years. There was a Trivial Pursuit question of who invented baseball in the 80s, and they have Abner Doubleday down there. If the Hall of Fame had started voting in 1910, and if Al Spalding had pushed for it, would Abner Doubleday be in the Hall of Fame today? I think there's a real good chance in that. In 1938, Alexander Cartwright entered the Hall of Fame, described as the father of modern baseball. In 1983, the 19th Century Committee of SABR was founded by John Thorne and Mark Rucker, and research started to be percolating on up to surface new names for consideration in the development of baseball. Duncan Curry, the first president of the Knickerbockers, rose to our attention, as did William Wheaton, both of whom contributed far more than Cartwright did to the development of the game. And I'm just trying to show you that we're continually finding evidence of new facts in the development of the game in the 19th century. We keep pushing it back. We thought 1845 was the start when the Knickerbockers, that was 25 years ago. We now go into the late 1700s. There are local teams that are going on that are being banned because they're playing too close to a church, and they're banning baseball. John Thorne found an ordinance in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, about 20 years ago. One of the documents we found was the laws of baseball. What you're looking at is the transcript of this. That's Doc Adams' handwriting. We know he was on the committee in the years these were developed. We just don't know which one of these things he did. We think now, as we understand, there are teams that go back to the 1830s. The Gothams, the Washingtons, the New York Baseball Club, the Magnolia Club, various things of this nature. In 1837, Will Wheaton, not the guy from Star Trek, wrote a set of rules with William Tucker for them. About 20 years later, he was in Nick. He was on the Knickerbockers, and we think he just kind of wrote their rules. We now think were the first set of rules, but clearly weren't. And a fourth innovator, Lewis Wadsworth, another Nick, he's the guy that gave us 9 innings, 9 players, beating Duncan Curry, who was supporting 7 players, 7 innings. It has not changed since 1858. So, can we say that we're not going to learn anything else and therefore Doc Adams is worthy? Well, no. We're going to learn a lot more as research continues. More documents are going to show up. Somebody's going to go through their attic someday and have a picture of something, someone, and it's going to change it. But Doc Adams is the guy that we look at him now has made a tremendous influence on the development of baseball, whether it was the first guy to do these things or whether it was just pushing through and administratively getting it done. And it doesn't hurt his chances that Doc's great-great-granddaughter, Marjorie, a friend to many of us, has carried the banner for many years for Doc Adams, keeping him in the public eye till her death in 2021. Next guy is Jim Creighton, named Overlooked Legend in 2019. Tom Gilbert, author of How Baseball Happens, says, Creighton invented modern pitching. Gilbert continues, he is an enigmatic figure, well known. We know less about him than we do about hundreds of his contemporaries, including his brother, who was not a famous athlete. His brother was a Tammany Hall functionary who was involved in a number of innovative political capers. Creighton was a baseball and cricket player in the late 1850s, and he was, even as a teenager, he was a player of real high order. He was probably a professional cricket player as a teenager, as cricket had a history of paying their better players. His baseball career was ostensibly as an amateur, but by the 1860s, we're starting to see different forms of compensation creep into the game. This is a picture of the New York Excelsiors in 1860. If you notice, third from the left is Jim Creighton holding a ball. And if you ever see a team picture, whoever's holding the ball is the team's pitcher. The way it worked, that was the iconography of the era. But Creighton is most famous for developing a style of pitching that added speed to pitches and let change the focus of the game to being the battle between the batter and the pitcher. Creation of the strike zone, and there's a less likely claim that he invented the curveball. Don't count on that one. Creighton's day, pitchers were required to serve up the ball underhanded. Think of the motion to pitch horseshoes as the way they had to come, because you had to pitch the ball, not throw the ball. But Creighton found a way to deliver a pitch that was more fast-pitch softball. There's several contemporary discussions of Creighton's delivery, absolutely none of which are any help in understanding how he threw the ball. We just know it was fast. Any research into Creighton's later life is impossible since he died at the age of 21 in 1862. And this is from a sporting paper, actually a general paper of the era in New York. Creighton is at the top with Creighton looking over the New York baseball scene as the great martyr of the sport. Tom Gilbert says that it's inexplicable that Creighton is not in the Baseball Hall of Fame. However, we've got to remember that pre-professional period when modern baseball was being invented, no player of any consequence has ever been recognized. And it's not, within the rules, we saw some folks come to Doc Adams in the last election. So there is some expansion of how we're looking at it. But when you look at the rules, it starts with players starts in 1876. We got Bud Fowler in, but that's because there's not. I think he was one of the 2 or 3 top players of the era. I think Frank Grant, in my opinion, was the top actual player who would have been a star in the majors. But if Hall voters don't become knowledgeable about major players in the 1880s, they're not going to learn much about the 1850s. So now let's take a look at the stars of the 1800s in the majors. And what do you think of this guy? Pretty good career. Top slugging percentage, runs scored, 5-time home runs leader. He scored 100 runs in 9 seasons. Well, this is Harry Stovey. Harry Stovey is one of my favorites among the overlooked legends. Also, he is a baseball link to America's Revolutionary War. When you look at these accomplishments and achievements, you might scratch your head and wonder, why is he so little known? And a few observations on the Hall of Fame and Stovey. When the Hall began selecting members, Harry Stovey had not played a major league game in 43 years. 43 years from today is 1981. Who has vivid memories of AL batting champion Carney Lansford? Who remembers ERA leader that year, Steve McCaddy? Names we remember, but I don't think we can sit there and say, yes, there, I remember him so well. Memories fade over time. Also, Stovey's most productive seasons were 1883 to 1891, with 7 of those in the American Association. The American Association had been dead for 45 years when the Hall of Fame came along. And can anybody name a player selected from the American Association to the Hall of Fame? It's going to be tough, because the answer is there is no one. Charlie Comiskey was named as an owner much more than as a player. He was a very worthy player for the American Association, but no one has ever come on through that time. The National League, think of the Frankie Frisch years of voting in the Veterans Committee, and you see an awful lot of, I think there's over 60 players from the 20s and 30s in the Hall of Fame. This is Harry Stovey's grave. This is his birthday, Harry Stowe. And he is, in 2004, there was a Nicolas Cage movie, National Treasure. One of the clues to finding the purloined Declaration of Independence was a code of pass and snow. Pass and stow. Well, pass and stow are the recasters in 1753 of the Liberty Bell. Stowe, John Stowe, is Harry Stovey's great-grandfather. We don't get a lot of that. There's also a Pass and Stowe grill at Citizens Bank Park in Philadelphia. I'm sure there's a few Liberty Bells around there too. Moving on, Tony Mullane was chosen the Overlook Legend in 2015. He legitimately collected 284 Major League wins. Hold on, I'm reading here. You would think that in addition to this number and 5 seasons of 30-plus wins, the Veterans Committee might take a little notice of this. But his life had a number of twists and turns. Born in Cork, Ireland, family came to America when he was 3, settled in Erie, Pennsylvania, and Mullane ran away from home to be a baseball player. He played with local teams, played with Detroit in the majors in 1881, was released, and signed with Louisville in 1882, the first year of the American Association. Now, he started his 30-win streak with 5 consecutive seasons that year. However, there's an asterisk. He won no games in 1885 because he was suspended for contract jumping and a few other funny things that he did. But nevertheless, it took him 6 years, but they were the 6 consecutive years of him actually playing. Now, during his career, he jumped contracts. He sat out parts of seasons for more money. He had all sorts of contract disputes, was accused and later cleared of throwing games, displayed racial animus against his catcher, Fleet Walker, had a habit of intimidating batters by hitting him with a ball before a rule was passed giving you bat at first base if you were hit in 1884. On several occasions, the right-handed pitcher threw left-handed in the game. One writer said, however, that he was always willing to bend the rules of the game. Well, a lot of guys were. He was talking about when you had to throw sidearm, he would throw a little higher, 3/4. There was almost no pitchers in the majors that didn't try to get a few inches and come on over until the rule was opened up and then you could throw any way you wanted to. But it's the passage of time that is causing him the most problems. Bob Carruthers was another great pitcher. He won 40 games twice, was the star pitcher on 4 consecutive pennant winners with St. Louis. he was nicknamed Parisian Bob because after one season when he had won 40 games and the World Series for St. Louis, he wanted more money. Surprise. And Chris Andras said no. So Crothers got on a boat and went to Paris. And he negotiated by telegram. He finally got his money in a game hall. And that's why you see him called Parisian Bob. Very, very good pitcher. However, they wore out his arm early. And after about 1889, he was an outfielder. He did play 10 years. He almost won a batting title when he was a pitcher. But such is life. He finished about third to Dave Orr. Although the actual, we redo some of the numbers, Guy Hecker was the guy who actually won the batting title. The last guy to talk about is Pete Browning, the first of the Overlook legends. Pete spent the bulk of his career with Louisville of the American Association, won 3 batting titles, including the Players League batting title in 1890. He also finished second in the batting title 3 times and third 3 times. So it's a nice little 9-year run that he had. His career batting average was .342. Good for 16th all time. And if you round off only to 3 digits, he's 13th. You got to go 4 digits to get it. Figure out there's a cluster of 3 or 4 players in 342, including Babe Ruth, who had a better batting average than the 340 that Lou Gehrig turned out. We don't think in that terms. When he retired, through 1890, he had the career batting average lead of all major leaguers, and he had the on-base percentage through 1888. He could hit. He was also illiterate, but he took a rather casual attitude to schooling. But nevertheless, he had a problem with his ear. He had mastoiditis, lots of pain. He drank a lot to ease the pain, and off he goes. And that's how he's remembered. People say that he was a terrible fielder. You look at the numbers, he was that much below average. He ran in the 1990. He was 99% of the league's average for outfielders. Roughly the same number Ted Williams, Goose Goslin, and Mickey Mantle. As the clock ticks down, I don't care. Close my brain. He died at the age of 44, mostly from development of brain injuries and problems with the mastoiditis. So on we go. There are a whole lot of others who are capable. Here are the Overlook Legend candidates this year. Voting ends 2 days from now. Anybody's a member of the 19th Century Committee and has voted, get online and go vote. If you're a member of SABRE, once we get this primary done, everybody can vote on the finals. But people like Dave Fouts, George Gore, Mike Tiernan, Silver King, Guy Hecker, Gus Wade, all are worthy of consideration, although not all of them are eligible because they didn't play 10 years or something of that nature. Bill James once said, the Hall of Fame is a self-defining organization. Now, how do you know you're a Hall of Famer? Because the Hall of Fame said so. But that's only part of the quote. Hall of Fame is a self-defining organization that has, by and large, failed to define itself. It's whatever they say it is. There are no real rules. They're all very squishy. You can find people that make it and don't make it for various reasons. Thank you for your time.